Right, now I want to move on to Dawn Whittaker, who I've known for many, many years when she was a young girl, and really proud and privileged to call Dawn a friend. Always talks truth to power. So without any further ado, really, Dawn, inclusive leadership from the world of Dawn Whittaker.
Thank you, Jack Dar, and hope you can all hear me. So when thinking about the title as posed by friends and colleagues at AFSA, I realised with 10 minutes I needed to focus because I could literally stand on a soapbox and yabber on about this forever. So I'm not. I'm going to be very focused, very short, and hopefully catch you up on your time scale a little bit. I'm going to focus in on an inclusive culture post-COVID, both inside and out, both for our workforce and the people we serve. And I'm going to focus in specifically on neurodiversity. So we all know some factors that are associated with our current situation and the national pandemic. We all know about the concerns around mental health and well-being, both of those we serve and our own staff. And vulnerability should be considered as a wider definition than the narrow scope that we sometimes consider from a fire perspective. And certainly I think NFCC and Fire and Rescue Services are getting better at this and not focusing in on the most obvious definitions of vulnerability. And Phil alluded to some of those things. And I'm going to focus in a minute on vulnerability from a wider perspective. The other thing I want to just emphasise as I move on to my next slide is about valuing difference. Because you cannot be an inclusive leader if you genuinely do not do this. And we need to think about the context that COVID has created. There has been a mood shift, a societal shift in tolerance. And Jack Dar alluded to some of that in terms of the anti-vaxxers. We've seen, all lives matter, etc., Black Lives Matter, all of that contention that was drawn about. And it shouldn't be contentious. We should be able, societally, to value difference. Otherwise, we will not achieve that difference. So when I talk about neurodiversity, what am I talking about? So it's an umbrella term. It's not been around for that long. Lots of you will be familiar with some of the conditions that it acts as an umbrella to. But effectively, the term neurodiversity was born out of the autistic syndrome awareness, but it was captured as a broader term to ensure that even those on a spectrum, and you'll hear me refer to the spectrum more than one occasion, have some inclusivity. I would say that with lots of other sectors of society, even within a defined if you like, spectrum, there can be quite a lot of contention and lack of inclusivity. And we've seen some of that in the LGBTI networks and groups. But this is also true of neurodiversity. But the key thing to understand, and that slide's a handy little slide, so I'd advocate, you photo that if you've got an iPad now, or we'll obviously send the slides. Because explaining that it's thinking styles, the head is a really strong symbol there. And you'll notice, colleagues and friends, that it doesn't point to what I would call clinical impacts. So when somebody has had an accident and has had some interruption to their brain patterns, that's not included in the term neurodiversity. Neither are some of the more clinical conditions. Bipolarism generally are not included within the umbrella of neurodiversity, because this is about normal people that just think differently and have their own superpowers. So a couple of key issues, because you can look up some research around neurodiversity for yourselves. So accessibility is a key issue for those on the spectrum, and virtual certainly has its limitations. Don't jump to generalizations and assumptions, because the spectrum is very, very, very broad. And even within the Autistic Society, you can have high-performing spectrum within autism, usually associated with Asperger's syndromes. So that's really important. Remember that everybody is a unique person. And although there are generalizations with certain conditions on the spectrum, they might not necessarily be true for that individual. And the best way to find out is to talk to that person. There will also be a loss of normal patterns and consistency. And I've particularly seen that, and I'm sure some of you may have as well, with homeschooling, not being able to see friends, not having the normal routine to the day. And that can be quite disruptive, particularly to those who are at the higher end of the spectrum. So think about that in terms of the people we serve and also the people working alongside us, because the normal patterns of behaviour that they would follow if they regularly go to the local shop to get their newspaper of a morning, and then they regularly follow a pattern which helps them with their day, those will all be disrupted. And actually, the important thing is for them, they may have had to change how things work for them. So don't assume that something that worked before is going to work now, because it may have changed. There will be litigation. Jack Dower alluded to it. There's been quite a lot anyway. So just to share with you, in East Sussex, the last 3 tribunals that were dealt with before I became Chief Officer were all associated with neurodiverse conditions. That demonstrates that as a sector, we have not got on top of this. And for those that have not come across the Business Disability Forum, the BDF, I would advocate you do have a look at their website. You can join, you can become a member, and their toolkits are very useful. There are lots of other companies out there. I better do a BBC, health warning there. I'm not advertising them particularly. I'm just saying that they are already utilised in the sector. The other important point I'd like to just make in terms of the post-COVID impact on both staff and the people we serve that may have a neurodiverse condition is their own esteem will be wavered by this. We've all been affected, haven't we? Everybody's been affected, but just give a moment's consideration to those that are dealing with a condition on top of all of the normal disruption that we've seen. I wanted to just bring to your attention, and some of you will already know this, that NFCC are working on a series of equality access statements. And these are really, they're documents, they're not the guidance that, in a sense, they're more a business case or a thinking paper on what issues may relate to other sectors of a society other than outside the protected characteristics. So the first one that came out was LGBTI. The second one that came out was neurodiversity. And I partly authored that one. And the third one that was just published yesterday was access to service and employment for Black people, both staff and those we serve. There are others to come and to follow. So I just encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to look at that link, to have a look. The consultation's closed on this one now, the next one's just opened, but you can still access the document there and have a look at it. And hopefully it will give you some food for thought. The intention with this is that all of these equality access statements will go to the NFCC Equalities Hub, the EDI Hub, and underneath them will be developed, if you like, best practice, guidance, policy documents that all fire and rescues services can tap into, and that we can work with partners on developing these even further, and our own staff, of course, so that it saves everybody, running around the same treadmill. Okay, I promised I'd be quick. I could talk on this topic all day, but I'm actually going to end there.
Thank you.
For you, Chair, to decide whether you want to offer
no,
a question.
Dawn, thank you very much for that. I think another key lesson here is one, following on from Phil, is open dialogue. Have those uncomfortable conversations. Be comfortable having an uncomfortable conversation with somebody who comes from a different background, who you want to understand their particular angle of the issues.